on Tom's programme, as we do every Friday at 10 to 6, and I have absolutely no idea how I am going to distill the events of the last week into 10 minutes, because you could spend 10 minutes talking about multiple events that have occurred here over the last week. We do have a bit of news as we begin this tonight, Iain. We know that President Trump has been talking to reporters aboard Air Force One, doing a mid-air gaggle, either just before or just after he left British airspace, and he was asked about his relationship with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. He said, "He's a very nice man. I guess I most disagree with him on two things. Immigration, which the President said is very rough for the UK, very rough," he repeated that, "and energy." And he again came back to what he was saying in that joint press conference at Chequers about his belief that instead of investing in alternative energy systems, solar, wind, which he absolutely excoriated during that press conference, he thinks that the United Kingdom should be doubling down on North Sea oil. So he said, those are the two things that I most disagree with him on, but I get along with him, right? He's a really fine person. So that is President Trump's summation of the nature of the bilateral relationship as it exists tonight at the end of that 36-hour state visit to the UK.
And I suspect Keir Starmer would be satisfied by that.
Well, I mean, certainly Donald Trump could have gone into more detail about other areas in which he and the Prime Minister are in disagreement. And, you know, reviewing what was said in that joint press conference, while I see various British newspapers reporting tonight that Downing Street is delighted that President Trump used that joint news conference to say of Vladimir Putin, he's let me down, and they feel as though the Prime Minister really got an opportunity to make his case that it's now time to act against Vladimir Putin and to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. Well, we didn't hear any of that from President Trump. He was pushed on more than one occasion by reporters to explain exactly what it is he plans to do regarding Vladimir Putin after this news that Putin has let me down, he's really let me down, and there was absolutely no indication of any threat to impose any sanctions on Russia whatsoever. Instead, we went on a very circuitous rhetorical journey on the part of the president that ended up with a bit of news that we didn't know, which is that the United States is trying to re-secure control of Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, that, of course, was abandoned when Joe Biden pulled American forces out of Afghanistan. We certainly didn't know that that was taking place. But if you look at a whole raft of other issues that came up in that press conference, Gaza, the events that are taking place there now as Palestinians flee Gaza City ahead of what they think is going to be a full-scale Israeli assault on the city, the decision by the Prime Minister to recognise a Palestinian state, on whether the war in Ukraine even matters to the United States or to the UK. The President insisted that he didn't necessarily think that it did. On the issues of free speech, immigration, the environment, as he's discussed on the plane tonight, they don't seem to agree on any of those issues. So the notion that Downing Street is feeling delighted about how this all went, particularly on that issue of the president criticising Vladimir Putin, it's very hard to see what more they got out of Trump other than Trump articulating the view that he feels let down by the Russian leader.
Well, I imagine Downing Street were absolutely thrilled that only one journalist thought it fit to bring up Jeffrey Epstein. Right at the end, Beth Rigby of Sky News did. I was quite amused. Effectively, Donald Trump said, Peter Mandelson? No, never heard of him.
I mean, that is, of course, a standard Donald Trump move. How many times has he told us he doesn't know people that have found themselves in difficulty that he obviously knows? I mean, he absolutely knew Peter Mandelson well enough for our colleague Andrew Marr to be reporting within the last week that he had learnt that the president's nickname for Peter Mandelson was Sneaky Pete. I mean, Peter Mandelson was alongside the president in the Oval Oval Office. They spoke to one another when Keir Starmer was on the phone from the UK on the day that they announced that partial trade deal. So he absolutely knows who Lord Mandelson is. But he...
Also, didn't he, I think in that very conversation, didn't he refer to Peter Mandelson saying he's got a lovely accent?
Yes, a beautiful accent.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's right. Yeah, no, he knows, of course he knows exactly who Lord Mandelson is, but he did not, clearly, the president, want to be dragged into a conversation about Jeffrey Epstein, not least because while he's been in the UK, his FBI director, Kash Patel, has left the president of the United States even deeper in the mire as a result of a just abysmal, completely incompetent congressional testimony that we witnessed from the FBI director while President Trump was travelling to the UK and then was there. So he definitely didn't want to talk about that and sort of left it to the Prime Minister to pick up and answer that question about why it was necessary for Peter Mandelson to go. But nobody in Washington, I mean, laughable to suggest that he didn't know who he is.
Right, let's go to some calls. Michael's in Rains Park. Hello, Michael.
Oh, good evening, Marion. Good evening, Simon. The question came up today about the autopen and the question of Biden's health during his presidency. I imagine that many British audience members may not have known what the autopen was because it's been so underreported by the media in this country, many of whose members belong to the lanyard class, as would be described by Lord Maurice Glassman. So I just wondered why this question of Biden's health during his presidency has been so underreported in the British media.
Iain, I think I may have lost you. I am not currently hearing you or Michael.
Right. Well, I will take over the question while we sort out the technicals there. I think the answer, Michael, is very clear. It's because both the American media and the British media did not want to report about Biden's health, partly because I think they were partly squeamish about it. It's not a very nice thing to do, to report on someone's increasingly obvious dementia or senility. Simon is back with us. I don't know if you did catch the question there, Simon, but it's all about why.
I did catch the question.
You did, fine.
I did, and sorry, I'm not quite sure what happened there. I lost Michael towards the end of that question, but I got most of it. So let's be clear about what happened in that press conference. Donald Trump called on 3 reporters today, one from GB News, one from Real America's Voice, a pro-Trump network, and one from Fox News. And the Real America's Voice reporter, Brian Glenn, he's not a reporter. He's a propagandist. He's a polemicist. He's in no way a journalist. He's the boyfriend of Marjorie Taylor Greene. He asked the president if there were any updates on the autopen issue. That is the decision by Joe Biden's administration, senior officials within Joe Biden's administration, to get numerous documents, some of them very significant documents, including the pardon documents that President Biden signed, approved in the final hours of his presidency, where he pardoned some of his family members preemptively so that President Trump couldn't then go after them. Those were all signed by autopen, which is a machine. Every American president traditionally signs letters and communications by autopen, routine correspondence, but not usually serious matters of state. And there is no question that for the Biden administration and the officials who served within it, questions are mounting up about the use of that autopen and whether it was sensible to go down that path, and whether, according to Republican critics of the Biden administration, President Biden genuinely knew that some of these documents were being signed. And President Trump is like a dog with a bone on the issue whenever he is asked questions questions about it by pliant members of the media, and the issue was first drawn to his attention by one of the polemicists who now sits in the White House press corps and who are not, I underscore, journalists or reporters. But certainly he indicated again today when he was asked that question, and it seemed like an extraordinary question to be asking given everything else that was going on, but, you know, you can ask the president any question you like. He indicated that he remains deeply concerned about it and that the Biden officials have questions to answer, which undoubtedly they do, and that there are continuing investigations into that crazy decision by Biden's team to get those pardons signed with autopen.
Why do you think it is, though, that the American media, and I would say the British media, are complicit in this as well? Why did they not report about the state of Joe Biden's health? Because it was... I mean, look, you're in Washington, I'm not, but I mean, I heard these rumours way back, and I remember talking about them on LBC and feeling slightly dirty for having done so, because it's not nice to talk about an elderly person's state of mind. But given it's the President of the United States, I thought it was entirely appropriate to do so.
Well, it was a cover-up. I mean, it was a classic Washington cover-up. I mean, I actually checked my own record, and I think the first time I raised questions about Joe Biden's decline was as early as October of 2023, so more than a year, on LBC. So more than a year before the presidential election, it was apparent that he was slowing down. I think you and I spoke about this. I certainly spoke about it with others on LBC about, you know, the fact that the White House was requiring Americans, the Biden White House, to disbelieve their own eyes when we saw what was taking place during the former president's trip, for example, to Normandy, where he was stumbling around, clearly lost and unaware of what he was supposed to be doing. And then once we got into the election campaign, when he appeared at a fundraising event with Barack Obama in Los Angeles, and former President Barack Obama had to lead him off the stage because he didn't seem to know where he was. But the White House was essentially saying to everybody, don't believe with your own eyes what you're seeing with your own eyes. And, you know, I think it was one of the greatest failures of modern American journalism, a lack of curiosity, a desire not to ask those difficult questions, a steadfast sort of Berlin Wall approach by not just the then White House press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, but by people around Joe Biden who were even telling other people in the administration, don't talk about this, don't worry about it, he's not as bad as you think he is, we're going to get him through this. You know, the notion that they thought that he could run for re-election, as Kamala Harris says in her memoir now, was deeply reckless, but she was also reckless for not standing up and saying, this is absolutely ridiculous. There's no way he can run for re-election. I'm going to, you know, we need a full-scale primary in order to pick a new candidate. But it was a classic Washington cover-up.
Right, we've got lots and lots of questions coming in, so we'll come to those in a minute with Simon Marks. He's with me until 9. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
17 minutes past 8. Simon Marks is here for another edition of Question Marks. Let's take a text from Kate, who says, LBC, how about you talk about Bill Clinton's visits to Epstein's Island? But you won't, will you? Well, we're about to prove you wrong. What's all this about then, Simon?
Well, we won't. We will, and we absolutely have on numerous occasions. I have reported on numerous occasions just over the last few months that one of the reasons why the Epstein files are so difficult for Democrats is because they don't know what's in there about Bill Clinton, who enjoyed a considerable friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, and certainly we believe made visits to Epstein Island. That's the island of St. John's in the British Virgin Islands that Jeffrey Epstein owned. He certainly was a regular flyer on what is colloquially known as the Lolita Express. And one of the reasons, as we have reported here on LBC, why Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, was arguing only a few weeks ago that the story of Jeffrey Epstein was just a massive distraction and that everybody needed to be focused on Donald Trump's relentless attacks on democracy, was because Nancy Pelosi is absolutely aware that those files could contain all sorts of incriminating information about the former president and also about potentially other prominent Democrats and their supporters who were friendly with Epstein. So not only have we not reported that, we have avowedly reported it, and if and when the Trump administration makes good on its pledge to release all of those files, which the Department of Justice now says don't exist, the contacts book, even though back in February the Attorney General Pam Bondi said that the contacts book was sitting on her desk, that she was going to review it and then released it to the public. Then weeks later suddenly it didn't exist. But if and when we get our hands on it, I think there will be tremendous interest in what it says about a whole variety of people, including Donald Trump, Bill Clinton and others.
Well, let's just on that subject take a call from Elliot in Cheadle. Elliot, hi.
Oh, hi, Ian. Good to speak to you and Simon. Two questions which are very connected and weren't asked at all at the earlier press conference. Firstly, why, in your view, Simon and Ian, is Trump so resistant to release the Epstein files, the full contents of them, if he has nothing personally to fear? Surely he wants the whole issue ended, doesn't he? And the second question, if I may, is why is Starmer intending to recognise Palestine next week as a sovereign state? Is there a judicial reason, a plan afoot, following Starmer's meeting with Mahmoud Abbas 10 days ago?
Well, on the first question, I think you answered your own question, didn't you? Simon, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there is the scent of a possible cover-up regarding these Epstein documents. And Kash Patel, the FBI director, only got Donald Trump into further difficulty this week. He testified in the Senate to say that there was no evidence to suggest that Jeffrey Epstein had trafficked underage girls to any other figures. And if there had been evidence, he absolutely would have zealously gone after it and launched prosecutions and investigations. But when he was in the House of Representatives, he conceded that, in fact, yes, indeed, Jeffrey Epstein had trafficked underage women to other people. He also conceded that it was possible that Donald Trump's name came up in Epstein's files more than 1,000 times, but he said the number wasn't important. And the more he was pushed by Democrats to explain what is contained in those files about the current president of the United States, and as our earlier texter Kate inferred, the former president of the United States, Bill Clinton, the more Kash Patel dissembled. And I think he created nothing more than a mire of fresh difficulty for the president of the United States when he gets back here in a few hours' time. I think it'll be Epstein that once again comes to dominate reporter questions and White House briefings in the days ahead. On the issue of Palestinian statehood, well, I mean, the British Prime Minister spoke for himself at the press conference as to why he believed it was the right thing to be doing at the United Nations General Assembly next week. And remember, the French will be doing it as well. So will be the Australians. I believe Malta is about to recognise Palestinian statehood. And I mean, their argument for doing it is that there needs to be some show of support for a two-state solution, as the Prime Minister said at the press conference today, and to push back on this abject refusal by Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis to get behind even now the concept of a two-state solution. But there is massive disagreement between Number 10 and the White House over this issue. President Trump has described as irrelevant previously. He didn't say this today, but he said it before. Irrelevant, the decision of the Prime Minister and Emmanuel Macron to recognise Palestinian statehood. I think it's also important to note that next week at the UN, the French will be hosting a session about the need for a two-state solution. And that is seen by the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres as in many ways the critical event of next week. It's not a session in which the United States will be participating, but it is one that many UN member states, including the UK, see as being quite important in drawing that line and saying we've got to get away from all of this violence and the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, and we've got to get back in a post-war environment to some kind of conversation about a two-state solution.
What's the latest on the reports earlier in the week that Donald Trump will not allow Palestinian representatives, including Mahmoud Abbas, into the United States to attend the UN General Assembly?
Yeah, I haven't seen an update on that. I'm still not clear as to whether they are issuing visas to some of those Palestinian representatives or not. He was also threatening not to give any visas to the Brazilian delegation, including President Lula da Silva, because of the conviction in a Brazilian court of Jair Bolsonaro and his sentencing to 27 years in prison for trying to overturn the result of that country's election. But, this idea that the United States gets to decide who can or cannot attend events at the UN headquarters in New York is a complete breach of its 1947 agreement, always to facilitate the travel of any head of government or head of state to attend UN events as part and parcel of its agreement to host United Nations headquarters on American soil. So it's a big break with precedent.
Elliot, thank you very much for your question. Let's move on to Rose in Tavistock in Devon. Hello, Rose.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Simon.
Hi, Rose. How are you?
Hi. Not too bad. Oddly enough, I said in March on this lovely show that we would become a vassal state. And I'm wondering how this trajectory can be reined back when people prefer, to quote a line I read once, the untruths with which we can comfort ourselves on the path to tyranny, when untruths such as certain things are seen suddenly as normal, like the lack of, for an independent democracy not to have forthcoming outrage to an American urging crowds in London to violently overthrow our government, not to show any outrage to a party leader fetching up in America to denounce his country and enlist a foreign state to attack our lawmaking, when we mourn for 3 days someone we've never heard of because he was Trump's ally, and when we focus on our lesser free speech issues, the aim of such focus being to diminish the reality that free speech in America has been removed and replaced by the doctrines of the regime in power. And saying that this is normal for an independent state is one of the untruths, and it's terrifying me.
Well, it's interesting,
Rose,
and you will want to stay listening after 9 because we're going to be talking about the free speech aspect of all of this after 9 o'clock. Simon?
Well, look, I mean, I think that the government is at a crossroads. Our government is at a crossroads. They've got a decision to make. Are they going to continue essentially prioritising the economic and trade relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom on the basis that this is the UK's biggest market, that it's the largest economy in the world, and that you've got to find a way of navigating through the now next 3 years and 3 months of Donald Trump's administration. And you do that by persuading the President of the United States that you are the European leader with whom he can work, as he has said on the plane this evening. You know, a very fine man, a very nice man. I get along with him. He's a really fine person. Is that ultimately to the country's benefit? And the Prime Minister, as he did today, would point to the deals that were signed within the last 24 hours and say, look, they're going to create 7,500 new jobs in the UK at least. They're going to lead to £250 billion worth of two-way trade between the United States and the UK. And they are going to embed American businesses, particularly AI and nuclear and quantum industries, in with the British economy. And if the price that we have to pay for that is that we have to turn a blind eye to some of the some of the issues from which we would normally recoil that President Trump is engaged in, well, that's a price that's worth paying. Now, that's the decision Number 10 has made. The difficulty with it is that by the time we get to next year, you know, in a year's time, what is this state visit going to look like? Free speech is being rolled back here, as you've seen, by the hour in the United States. We are seeing masked agents of Trump's Immigration, Customs and Enforcement Division carrying on the streets of American cities in a manner that more resembles the sort of events that you would traditionally associate with Vladimir Putin's government in Russia or other hardline authoritarian states. At what point do all of those issues, including the president's stance on Ukraine and his tolerance of Benjamin Netanyahu, at what point do those come crashing in to the decision to maintain a friendly relationship because you need to do trade and business with the Americans? And that's the tightrope that the Prime Minister is now walking.
Rose, thank you very much for that. A text here from Mohammed. I'm going to be benevolent and assume that you've meant this with your tongue firmly in your cheek, Mohammed, because if you haven't, you're an absolute disgrace. The United Nations should be moved to the UK or Moscow. Now, there has been a suggestion from the Liberal Democrats that if Mahmoud Abbas, President Abbas, isn't allowed into the United States, the whole of the United Nations should come out of New York and go to Geneva. Well, I can't see anything particularly wrong with that. Simon, you wanted to come in?
Well, there is precedent for that, Ian, because the only time you can find any sort of precedent for not giving these visas to Mahmoud Abbas or threatening to withhold them from the Brazilians was, I think, I can't remember now, I think in the mid-90s, I forget the year, but there was a refusal to provide a visa to Yasser Arafat, the head of the PLO at the time, to attend a session on the Middle East at the United Nations, and so the UN upped sticks and took the session to Geneva where Arafat could attend. Now, the difference is that at the time, Arafat was not a head of government. He was the head of the PLO, but they were not at that point an elected government. And so, the United States could argue it was not breaching the 1947 agreement. This time round, they're in absolute flagrant breach of that 1947 agreement, and they don't care.
1988 was the year, Simon.
Thank you very much.
Not that I knew that. Chris just put it on my screen. I'm not going to claim any credit for that whatsoever. Right, more questions to Simon Marks for the next half an hour. 0345 6060 973. First, though, the LBC News headlines with Matt Hewitt.
President Trump says he disagrees with Sir Keir Starmer on two issues, immigration and green energy. He was speaking aboard Air Force One on the way home from his second state visit to Britain. An Eritrean man will be deported to France after losing a High Court challenge to have his removal under a one-in, one-out scheme blocked. His barristers had said he'd not been given a chance to show he was an alleged trafficking victim, but the judge said his claims weren't credible. And a Scottish minister has admitted using poor language towards a fellow MSP at Holyrood, but denied assaulting him. Jamie Hepburn was accused of targeting Tory Douglas Ross when leaving the chamber yesterday. LBC weather. Spells of rain for central and northern areas tonight, lows of 10. Thick cloud and rain spreading into northern and western England, southern Scotland and Wales tomorrow. Drier and sunnier elsewhere, with highs of 27 degrees.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:34 on LBC, and we have some very kind listeners listening, Simon. They seem to be very worried about you. This is one from Simon. Well, we're all permanently worried about him, don't you worry. Steve says, does Simon have a backup plan for when the USA descends into anarchy? Mike says, with Simon reporting fairly and critically on Donald Trump where it's due, does he worry about his visa or professional access in DC?
Well, as to a backup plan, if the country descends into anarchy, I mean, my backup plan would be hopefully to stay here and report it for you all. I have been here a very long time. This is my 33rd year? Yeah, my 33rd year in Washington, D.C. Am I concerned about coming and going? I'm about actually to head to the UK for a couple of weeks, and we'll see what happens when I fly back in. But so far, there's been absolutely no issue whatsoever. Look, I mean, I think it is a concern. There's a bigger answer to the question. This is not to move this away from me, but there are bigger issues going on here with regards to foreign journalists working in Washington, D.C. The Trump administration has revived a plan that it had in the dying weeks of its first administration and was never able to put into practice, to change the visa regime for foreign reporters who come here to cover events in the United States. And what has been a renewable 5-year visa is going to be reduced to 240 days. Renewable, they say, if your assignment is still not complete. But the thing about that is that if a new reporter arrives here with only a 240-day visa, as they undoubtedly know, you won't be able to open a bank account, you won't be able to rent a property here because no landlord's going to lease you a property for less than a year, and you certainly won't be able to bed down and make the kind of contacts and do the kind of in-depth reporting that you need to do if you truly want to understand what is taking place in this country. So the European Broadcasting Union has issued a statement. I'm one of many signatories to it, urging a rethink on the part of the government of that plan. I am not on one of those I-visas. I am a permanent legal resident of the United States. And as with any other permanent legal resident, have the rights to come and go. And obviously, also the US government has the right to change those regulations should they deem a change is ultimately going to be required. But for the moment, you're stuck with me. I'm here and you're stuck with me.
Well, Kevin is very pleased about that because he says, every time I listen to Simon Marks, I always come away more educated. Well, you can't get a bigger compliment than that, can you, Simon? And you're not going to get a bigger one than that over the course of the next 20 minutes. I shall see to it. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to Simon. David is a new caller in Malvern. Hello, David.
Hello, guys. How are you?
We are very well. What would you like to say?
Good, thanks, David.
Great, and I concur fully with Kevin. I love listening to you both. So I don't. It's not an opinion. I'm a very opinionated sort of guy, but I have a question which I think Simon might be able to answer. It's about Trump and a third term. Now, I know the Constitution says you can't do 3 terms, but is there anything constitutionally that stops him standing as, say, the vice president, pushing J.D. Vance forward, and then going a month in, do you know what, J.D. Vance, stand aside, or go ill for a couple of months, and, the vice president then steps up? Because, we didn't think he was going to get in the first time. We certainly didn't think he was going to get in the second time. So in this alternate universe that we're in, is that possible?
Well, there is precedent for that, isn't there? Except it was in Russia where Dmitry Medvedev, he took over as president from Putin, didn't he?
Yeah, and if you think, the relationship with him and Putin, because, that's a great idea. And it's just that, it's this alternate reality. And for Simon as well, this must be manna from heaven, being in the States at this time, because you just have to look at the news each week and you've got a dozen things you can talk about.
Okay, Simon.
Each day, David, each day. Look, those are great questions. I mean, if I can just pause briefly to reflect on the state of the American Constitution, because it is ultimately the Constitution that is supposed to determine the rules of the road when it comes to how many terms a president can serve. I mean, the Constitution says nothing about outlawing hate speech. The Constitution says nothing about employers being obligated, in the words of the Attorney General this week, to fire members of staff who say horrible things. That's the new definition for what gets you fired here, according to the chief law enforcement officer of Donald Trump's administration. So these constitutional guardrails are being bulldozed on a daily basis here. And one of the issues that constantly just bedevils America is the fact that nobody ever wants to stand up and say this Constitution actually might not be worth the paper that it's written on, and maybe we should be thinking about a rewrite, and perhaps it's time for a serious conversation about whether the Constitution is any longer fit for purpose. You are absolutely right. The Constitution, in theory, says that Donald Trump has to leave office at the end of this term. He obviously is flirting with the idea of not doing that. Every single time a foreign leader arrives at the White House, before they leave, they're escorted to the gift shop by the president. I'm not making this up. And they are given the run of the place and offered the opportunity to grab some Trump 2028 hats. So he's clearly thinking about it. And they have floated
on sale in the White House gift shop.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
The Trump 2028 hats, and also the hats that say Trump was right about everything. And he took certainly a couple of those European leaders that were here with the Prime Minister and Zelensky into the gift shop. He took the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia into the gift shop.
Do you not mean Azerbaijan and Albania?
And Albania, yeah. Well, those two. He took them into the White House gift shop, and it's a moment of largesse. He says, "Take whatever you want," So he's obviously thinking about it. This idea of putting J.D. Vance or someone else as the presidential candidate, he's the vice presidential candidate, then they get into office and on day one there's an abdication. I mean, I think it's just constitutionally too cute by half, but it's certainly something that has been talked about and has been floated as an idea. Equally, he has in recent weeks sounded a bit more ready to think about J.D. Vance as his successor than many of us, I think, immediately thought that he would be. So there's a bit of grooming of J.D. Vance as a possible future leader of MAGA taking place, even while he tries to flog the old Trump 2028 hats.
Thank you very much for that, David. No, actually, yes, that was David, wasn't it? David, by the way, I'm coming to Malvern next March to do an event in your wonderful local theatre, so watch out for the tickets for that. Dave says, could the UK deal directly with California? Well, the answer to that, Simon, is that when Penny Mordaunt was in the Trade Department, she came to a lot of trade agreements with individual states, didn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. California, New York, you can trade with individual states. And indeed, one of the arguments that the last government in the UK advanced, and this one early on, was that even if you couldn't get the full free trade agreement, you could carry on engaging in direct outreach to individual American states. And indeed, many states have sent trade delegations of their own to the UK, particularly states, I think, in the Farm Belt. I think Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's former running mate, now the governor of Minnesota, I think he has made trade visits to the UK in the past. So you can absolutely do that. It's just that you can't get the full national deal that you really want, and it takes a lot more effort to pick these arrangements off state by state, governor by governor. But yes, the answer to the question is yes, you can, and I'm sure even with the trade agreements that have already been struck between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer, there will be individual governors here that want to carry on travelling to the UK to see whether they can advance their own state's economic interests by doing those kind of striking those kind of arrangements.
Here's a good one. Someone says, do you consider your role, Simon, akin to William L. Shirer?
Oh, very interesting question.
Okay,
William
just
L. Shara,
explain to us who
for
he
the
was.
uninitiated, who was the famed American correspondent who really charted the rise of Adolf Hitler for American audiences in the run-up to World War II. I mean, I don't necessarily model myself on that precise experience, but I think that those of us who are witnessing what we've seen here in the United States over the last, really the last 15 to 20 years, are witnessing the atrophying of America as the indispensable nation. I mean, you could even hear from President Trump today at the joint press conference the argument that, Ukraine didn't really matter very much to the United States. He even turned to the Prime Minister at one point and said, I'm not even sure it matters that much to you. I mean, sure, you're closer to it, but, it's still quite a long way away. I mean, this is no longer the country that is even projecting itself as the shining city on the hill, the beacon of democracy that Ronald Reagan used to talk about. And I think it is important on a daily and weekly basis to chart as many of the developments that change the role that the United States is playing internationally and change the disposition for Americans themselves of life in this country. Who would ever have imagined that we would live to see a moment when every single exhibit, every single artifact on display in the storied Smithsonian Museum institutions that line the centre of Washington, D.C., an array of magnificent museums here in Washington, every single exhibit is being audited to make sure that it aligns with Donald Trump's personal interpretation of history. We've lived to see the defenestration in the last 24 hours of another late-night comic on American television because he says, as the president described them today, horrible things. Again, constitutionally protected free speech. But ABC binned him last night because they were under enormous pressure from the Trump administration to do precisely that. So, when you see these things day by day, they all add up to an astonishing picture, and only in the sense that William Shara was painting an astonishing picture of what was taking place in Germany in the run-up to World War II. I think we are all here, hopefully, painting an astonishing picture to the best of our respective abilities about what's taking place in the United States.
Well, somebody I saw a WhatsApp message warning you and I that our comments about Azerbaijan and Albania, they're the sort of things that got Jimmy Kimmel fired. So if this is our last joint show on LBC, I hope you've enjoyed it. But luckily, we have people of stronger, I was going to say a word that I shouldn't say on the radio then, stronger heart than possibly ABC. We will be talking about that a bit after 9 o'clock as well. Question for me here, Iain, when are we getting an update on your Manjaro journey, as I'm waiting patiently? Why is that so
Aren't
funny?
we all?
Well, there isn't much of an update. All I can say is it's improved my blood sugars amazingly, but I've only lost 4 pounds in weight in a month, which is a little bit disappointing, but no side effects, and the dosage is doubling on Saturday, so goodness knows what might happen on the programme next week.
By the time I see you next week, you'll be a shadow of your former self.
Well, I wish. Right, let's take a break and we'll come to more of your calls. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:47.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
Last week we saw an escalation in the conflict with Russian drones seen flying in Polish and in Romanian airspace. I sat down in the morning with the Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kellin.
We have no motive to do that at all.
Why were they there then, Mr. Ambassador, the drones?
We have seen many false flag operations from Kiev authorities during these years.
So it wasn't Russian activity in Poland?
I don't think so, no.
So 20 drones in 2 different countries, no Russian involvement. You want me to believe that, Mr. Ambassador?
If you do not like, of course it is up to you, but I'm just delivering you facts since we have no motives.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio, on Global Player and the LBC app. leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
10 to 9 on LBC. Right, let's go to Wasim, who is in Kenley in Surrey. Hello, Wasim.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for taking my call. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Wasim.
Hi. So the question I have is farmers out in the US. So I'm hearing that basically China have pretty much dropped all of their soybean imports from the US to like almost 100%. And a lot of the farmers out there are now facing bankruptcy. Is there any truth to that story?
Yeah, there is truth to that story. It's a looming problem for the Trump administration, particularly in agricultural states that are Republican-run. There is enormous pressure being placed on locally elected lawmakers, those serving in the House and the Senate, and, of course, governors, to try and do something about it, because they are arguing that Donald Trump's tariffs have made it absolutely impossible for them to shift soybeans that they grow in enormous abundance to markets that have simply said, right, I mean, forget it. We're imposing reciprocal tariffs, and under no circumstances are we going to accept your soybeans unless you pay our tariffs. And that is one of the positions that China has endorsed. So it is absolutely causing concern, not just among the farming community, but among elected lawmakers with the Republican Party from those particular states. Because, of course, next year, November 2026, we've got the entire House of Representatives up for grabs and 1/3 of the Senate, and elected Republicans are worried that those farmers are going to rise up and try and vote them out of office. There are all sorts of other impacts of legislation that the president has seen passed, that big, beautiful bill of his that is causing dislocation for so many Americans, and they are venting their frustration on lawmakers during the most recent summer recess that Congress took. So many Republicans went back to their home districts and found themselves getting an absolute earful from their constituents, even though the President of the United States was saying again today that the American economy is booming and he's bringing in trillions of dollars, not just of foreign investment, but tariff revenues into the United States. It is causing real dislocation, particularly in those farming communities.
Wasim, thank you. A slightly quizzical question from Nick here, who says, are turquoise shirts in fashion in Washington, D.C.? He's obviously watching on Global Player or the LBC app. That's the advantage, you see. You get to see Simon Marks' fashion sense.
Yes. For those of you listening on the radio, you are really missing out on my... I think it's not turquoise. I believe the colour is teal, Nick. Teal.
That's a bit...
As to whether they're in style, I don't know. They're in style in this studio.
It's a bit Reform UK, isn't it? I got criticised on Tuesday for the shirt I was wearing on Tuesday evening with Kemi Badenoch. I had a message from a former female Tory MP, that's you, Anna Firth, saying, why are you wearing your pyjamas on air? Rude.
Barack Obama this week found himself shown a picture of that day when he wore a tan suit. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And the uproar it created when he was president?
Quite right.
And he still maintains that he looked fantastic wearing it.
No, he really didn't. Christina is in Purley. Hello, Christina.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for taking my call.
Hi.
As we've managed to persuade Rachel from accounts to part with an awful lot of money to welcome Donald and Melania to a lovely weekend in UK, how much does it cost the US, to let Trump come over with his entourage of planes and helicopters and cars and safety people?
It's a great question, Christina. I mean, the answer is a fortune. I don't have a total figure for you, but I can tell you that Air Force One alone costs about $175,000 an hour to fly. So you can do the maths on that. It's 7 or 8 hours, 14 hours round trip from the United States to the UK. So that's, a significant chunk of change, 14 times $175,000 an hour. And then, as you absolutely point out, they bring this vast entourage. I mean, the president travelled this time around, not just with members of his cabinet and senior figures from inside his administration, but they also brought an array of captains of industry judiciary with them. I suspect some of them will have flown in on their own private planes, but others will have been aboard Air Force One as the guest of the president. They bring over helicopters as well. In fact, there was an incident with Marine One tonight after it departed Chequers, and it was on its way to Stansted. Out of an abundance of caution, they said, due to some issues with the hydraulics, they put down on another airfield, and the President and the First Lady got out and went into a support helicopter and completed the journey to Stansted that way. So all of that adds up, plus there's the security, plus there's the costs of hotels and accommodation. I mean, it's millions and millions of dollars by the time this is all done. And this was only not even a 48-hour trip. So that gives you a sense of what is travel on a continuing basis, not even just internationally, but domestically. Every time he goes back and forth to Mar-a-Lago or up to New Jersey, it's an enormous amount of taxpayer money that is spent on this.
Have you seen the film Heads of State, Simon?
I have not.
It's about a British Prime Minister who hates an American president, and the
this is the new one. Yeah. Right. I've seen it. I've not seen it, but I've seen the trailer.
An Air Force One gets sort of blown out of the air, but they both have parachutes, and they end up landing in Belarus. It's one of the worst films I can confidently say that I've ever seen. But it's not.
Well, thanks for that spoiler.
Tiago.
I'll go right home and watch it.
No, really, don't bother. Tiago's in Bristol. Hello, Tiago.
Oh, hi. Thanks for having me on. I just wanted to build on the point from earlier and ask a question about Brazil and how the U.S., how Trump has been, bullying Brazil in order to try to interfere on the judicial system. So I'd like to ask Simon to give us his analysis of that situation. And my question would then be, does the rest of the Western world and Europe ignore Brazil as a growing economic power at their peril and pushing Brazil to the arms of China and Russia with a connection with BRICS, for not standing up for Brazil when Trump was bullying their judicial system?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tiago. I mean, the president's handling of Brazil is one of a handful of examples that other countries should be keeping an eye on very closely, because he's had this fury towards Brazil over the prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro, his philosophical soulmate, who also tried to overthrow the outcome of a democratic election in Brazil and tried to stop Lula from becoming president in exactly the same way as Donald Trump tried to stop Joe Biden from becoming president of the United States. He's just been convicted at trial, sentenced to 27 years in jail. And Donald Trump has used, in the case of Brazil, tariffs and trade policy as a tool with which to sanction Brazil, because he's so angry over President Lula's handling of that case and the actions of the judiciary, including members of the Supreme Court of Brazil that have been sanctioned by the Trump administration for human rights abuses. You rightly point out that Brazil, of course, is a founder member of BRICS, along with Russia, India, China and South Africa. Lula is now coming to the United Nations General Assembly next week. He said yesterday that he has absolutely no relationship at all with President Trump. Bolsonaro's son, one of them, is living here in the United States, tipped as a possible future leader of Bolsonaro's movement in Brazil, given that Bolsonaro's either going to go to jail or be incarcerated at home as a result of that 27-year sentence, because, as you know, he's got medical issues. But it's a real it's an example of what can happen to countries if they run afoul of President Trump, particularly with regard to their treatment of political figures that he considers friendly. And let's remember that in the UK, there is no political figure that he is more friendly with than the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage. And keeping an eye on that personal relationship, I think, is going to be extremely important, especially now the state visit is over. Donald Trump is about to land back here on American soil, and let's see how much of the bonhomie that was established and the entente cordiale that was established over the last 2 days, let's see how long that lasts.
Simon, thank you very much for joining us over the last hour. Always a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more from you over the next few days. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to stick with the President of the United States to an extent in this hour, but I want to broaden out the argument about free speech, because there's been a lot of criticism from members of the Trump administration about free speech, or the state of free speech in the United Kingdom. I will happily admit that I have concerns about some aspects of free speech in this country now. But isn't it a tad hypocritical when effectively Donald Trump has had an American chat show host, Jimmy Kimmel, fired? Now, he didn't actually sort of pull the lever himself, but we'll go into that in a moment. I want to know whether you think free speech is more under threat in America or here.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Donald Trump's told the Prime Minister he should use the military to stop illegal migration before leaving on Air Force One at the end of his state visit. The President's final day was mainly spent with Sir Keir Starmer at Chequers, where the two leaders signed a £250 billion tech deal. John Vine, former Chief Inspector of Borders, told LBC it's not